Welcome to the SmartTechCheck Podcast, hosted by Mark Vina, your home for candid, insightful, and provocative conversations about the smart home automation, security, smartphones, PC and console gaming, and much more.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, host of the SmartTechCheck Podcast. Today is Thursday, January 27th, 2022. Joining me for today's podcast is the dynamic duo of John Quain, who writes for the New York Times, Smart Cities, and Tom's Guide. Stewart Wolpin, who writes for Twice, U.S. News, and Investopedia. And Rob Pereiro is actually doing his civic duty. I believe he's helping, if I'm not mistaken, with he's helping out with vaccinations, isn't he, guys? Did you see his message?
Yeah.
I know. You got to love him. You know, he's probably at a secret Washington Nationals meeting or something like that. Who knows? But how are you guys doing? How's your Thursday working out for you?
Chilly.
Well, I have this podcast I have to be on, but other than that, I'm fine.
Thank you for the vote of endorsement. That's the last time I put on a tie for you, Stewart.
Yeah, you put it on for me.
Just for you. Anyway, you know, it's been a bit of a slow. You know, would you agree the last week or so has been kind of slow from a tech topic standpoint? I feel like, you know, we're in that kind of, you know, if you're a sports fan, we're in that kind of awful period between the football season hasn't ended yet, but between that period and the start of baseball, and you're like, what the heck am I going to do? You know, especially if you don't like basketball, which I'm not really that thrilled at. But I don't know, it just feels like kind of a bit of a, you know, just kind of a slow period. What do you guys think?
Definitely. This is the down period, the post-CES period between now and sometime in February. And, you know, people are pitching me in the same products they pitched me a few weeks back ago. So you can tell it's slow when they're throwing the same ideas back at me. And people are like, but spring's going to be here soon. It's freezing here. So, yeah, a bit of a slow period. Stewart, your thoughts too?
Well, yeah, I mean, from a sports point of view, this is almost the worst time of year. Once the Super Bowl is over, I would rather crawl into a hole and not come out until pitchers and catchers report, which fortunately is not that long a period of time, but it's right. Still kind of awful now because with the labor situation, we don't know if they're going to have a new collective bargaining agreement. But from a tech point of view, the big news will happen in about 10 days from now when Samsung unveils the new Galaxy S22 model. So, I mean, right now, I mean, that's what I think in the tech industry, most people are sort of gearing up for is that and Mobile World Congress at the end of the month.
And then the Samsung announcement is coming. I think it's February 9th, if I'm mistaken. It's not too far away.
I thought it's February. You mean Samsung? I thought it's February.
Samsung.
Yeah, February 8th.
Oh, February 8th. I'm sorry. Yeah, so it's right around the
RSVP. So I forgot to RSVP, so I'll RSVP. I'm just making a note.
I never quite understood why that event you RSVP because they broadcast it on every channel, you know, in the world. So that's a different podcast topic. But anyway, it hasn't been completely devoid of news. I think both of you guys will have some fun with this topic. Is that, you know, Spotify over the couple of last day or so, they took down Neil Young's music after Joe Rogan, after his ultimatum, essentially, where if you don't take Joe Rogan's podcast down, you know, you might as well take my music down. And Spotify, you know, gave in to Neil Young's request. So let me start with you, John. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, it is a big question. I mean, the you know, corporate responsibility. I mean, they're always doing these ESG things and, you know, equality, sustainability, and governance. And this seems to be kind of under those headings. And if a company is going to be serious about actually public policy, Neil Young has a point. And there isn't a free speech issue because Spotify is not a public corporation. I mean, they're a public corporation, but they're a private company. They can do whatever they want. Right. So, you know, I want to see some of the more, you know, prominent artists maybe push to say, hey, I want to do the same thing and see what happens, because this is life and death stuff. So it seems pretty serious to me.
Stewart.
Well, I'm sort of in the same camp with John on on that second point. I mean, from a pure business point of view, from Spotify's point of view, Joe Rogan has 100 million followers or listeners, and Neil Young has 6 million. So, it's sort of like, gee, who should we placate here? So, I mean, as far as Neil Young is concerned, this could be, as Eric said in Animal House, a futile and stupid gesture, unless he gets other artists, say, from this century to join in, the Taylor Swifts, Drake's, The Weeknd, Justin Bieber, Dua Lipa. I mean, somebody from this century to perhaps join in who might have as much clout as Joe Rogan does. And quite frankly, none of those have the clout that Joe Rogan has, or at least the listening base. I think the most is like 20 million for some of the top performers, where, like I said, Rogan is 100 million. But the other side of this, and I like Neil Young. Don't get me wrong. I like Neil Young. I love him, almost everything he's ever done, but he sort of can be, the blame for some of this can be laid at his doorstep. This whole anti-vaxxing thing, 6-7 years ago, he mounted this whole anti-GMO campaign and did a whole album against Monsanto for GMO. Not that I'm a fan of Monsanto, by the way, but apparently almost every reputable science on the planet has said that GMO is not only not a bad thing, it's a good thing, but it was this whole biotechnology effort that Young was fronting that has led to a lot of the anti-vax thing that we have now. I'm not saying he's completely at fault, but it certainly is some of the underlying issues with the anti-vax movement is that they're anti-biotechnology. So it's an interesting thing from a Spotify point of view, and from the people who are not getting vaxxed, Neil who. So unless some of the other prominent Spotify performers follow suit, it's a futile and stupid gesture.
So Stewart, because you glossed over something very quickly because you were saying it a bit tongue in cheek, and I'm being a bit cynical about this. Do you really think Spotify's decision was based on, hey, I'm not going to have Neil Young tell us who we can and can't have on our platform? Or do you think it's purely, hey, the 100 million follower personality wins over the 6 million follower personality?
I'm sorry, show me a corporation that doesn't make its decisions based on its bottom line. I mean, I'm not being cynical. I'm being realistic. Companies make decisions based on the bottom line. Now, I don't know if Spotify is a public company, but it would certainly be even more to their benefit to say goodbye to Neil Young. Again, we're old. We know who Neil Young is. We like Neil Young. But to most of Spotify listeners, it's Neil who. Nobody knows who Neil Young is outside of our generation. He doesn't mean anything to anybody outside of our generation. And the people you need to reach are not in our generation is pretty much pro-vaccine, so he's preaching to the choir.
Except that one important, this isn't a futile gesture because everybody's talking about it and it is a big news story. It's in the New York Times, it's on local TV stations. Right?
I understand that. I just don't think it's going to reach the people.
That's a huge deal because most people had no idea, most of humankind, that Spotify was allowing
just
this kind of material on there.
Does not mean that he's going to change anybody's mind.
You know what? But it does. I mean, I'll listen to Pandora rather than Spotify. When Novak Djokovic was going to play the Australian Open, I'm a Novak fan. I actually like the guy. I've seen him play live, but I was going to boycott the Australian Open. Because you got to make a decision. And I think this brings attention to Spotify, that Spotify runs this material. I had no idea that Spotify ran this crap, and they should never run this crap. But
they have actually said that they run this
crap. So
But John, let me just stop you there right now. Is that in that Spotify is a very popular podcast platform. It's not just it's just not a music streaming service. And if you're going to host platforms, the material is going to be all over the place. And, Spotify, and I'm not passing judgment on the accuracy of all the wonderful things that were shared in the Joe Rogan podcast. We can have that debate separately. But I think the point is that if you're going to go after Joe Rogan, then there's a lot of other podcasts on Spotify. You could make that same determination on that.
Actually, there isn't. So there isn't Nazi propaganda on Spotify. and if they find racist stuff too, they take it down. So actually, that's not accurate. This stuff is in that group, and I don't know why these, except for the money aspect, and it's a lot of money. I understand that, but it should be taken off in the same grounds that those things are taken off of YouTube and Spotify and any other platform you want to mention that's got, an actual business. So that's not really an excuse. It's just the money. It's like Twitter and Trump. He violated every single precept they had written down, but they wouldn't take him off until like the pressure finally got there, because he had how many millions of followers, right?
Well, I mean, first of all, Spotify has made statements in the past saying that they wouldn't post anti-vaxxer material. So they have come out from a corporate standpoint. So to a certain extent, them leaving Rogan up there violates their own policy. Yep. But I don't think the Twitter analogy is accurate, only because Twitter's not losing anybody money or followers by not having Trump on there. Whereas 100 million Spotify subscribers, that's actual money coming in the door if people don't subscribe to Spotify to get Joe Rogan. And I would hazard to guess that there are a lot of Spotify subscribers who only subscribe to Spotify or primarily subscribe to Spotify just to listen to Joe Rogan. So I mean, there's a lot more money at stake, which is why I'm suspecting that Spotify is not doing anything except getting rid of Neil Young.
Well, there's another related tech news thing, is because I used to work for him. Full disclosure, I wrote a column for his magazine, Brill, Stephen Brill. I don't know if you guys have seen that effort, but a lot of advertisers are on Spotify, and you don't know when your ad's going to pop up alongside of one of these crazy, things. And you don't want to be associated. You don't want your e-bike associated with that, or your insurance company associated with that. So what they do is they go around and look to see if this stuff is falling in alongside, and then tell the advertiser as a service, hey, you probably don't want to be with this or that or the other thing. I think that's, because the money, to your point, Stewart, is the money is not from subscribers to Spotify. Does somebody really subscribe? It's the advertising.
Advertising,
right?
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
So, that's sort of where this goes, but it's hard to track it all down. And, kudos for Neil. I had no idea this stuff was on Spotify. I really didn't. And I listen to this stuff all the time.
Well, like I said, I applaud him for doing it. I wish he didn't have the anti-GMO stuff in his background. But I think the only way that this really moves the needle is if somebody like Taylor Swift or Drake or The Weeknd come out and say, we're doing the same thing. I think that's the only way that Spotify actually moves anywhere on this.
I'm going to call Taylor right after we end this.
Yeah, call Barry Manilow and Michael Bublé to see if they have that kind of. But which I'm sure I got to look their numbers up to see what their numbers are like on Spotify. But I do think, before we get to the next topic, I think it's going to be interesting over the next couple of months to see if who of a big nature, a big kahuna, so to speak, follows Neil Young's situation. And I don't know. I have a feeling that, the numbers are so big sometimes that it's hard. The business advice that big celebrities will get is that, do you really want to throw yourself in front of the train and hurt yourself financially? But we'll see what happens. Our next topic here. You guys, you've got to help me with this one, guys. I mean, this has been going on now it's not a new topic. It's obviously, since they had the second pause in terms of implementing the 5G around airports. What I can't figure out, and I wish Pegarero was on the podcast, because he would have a lot to say about this. I can't for my life understand how the FAA, the FCC, you name the regulatory agency, could not have been more proactive about this. I mean, I take the position that I don't think the airlines want people to die. I'm pretty sure. I think that they're on the side of people living. Now, that's not to say that they may be being too overly aggressive in getting 5G implemented. They point to the fact that, hey, by the way, in Europe, the 5G rollout has been much more aggressive than it has been over here. But I'd like to get each of your perspective. Has this turned into just a political issue, or who is sleeping at the wheel? John, give me your perspective right off the bat, because to me, 5G is one of the great technical innovations that we're going to see over the next few years. And it's just a shame that this seems to be a bump in the road and maybe it is more, maybe it's just a bump in the road and we'll be laughing about this a few months from now. But it just bothers me that there was not more proactive action on this.
I mean, to begin with, there is a technical problem. There's just no question about it. No matter what the wireless companies say, there is a technical problem, and it's not all of 5G. Obviously, it's just in this particular band, the 3.7 gigahertz.
Near airports.
Yeah, near airports, and that's an issue. Period. The end. So their PR about it's not an issue. It actually is an issue, and it can affect altimeters in older airplanes or older altimeters. There's no question about it. So, and they've recognized that and admitted that in other countries. So that's one point. I think this was just like blackmail, extortion to the government. They were upset. They spent this money. They want to make as much money as they can on it. And as far as I can tell, it's true that the government agencies have conflicting things that have been dragging their feet and could have been more active about coming up with decisions or a plan to deal with this, and they didn't. And so the wireless companies, well, not all of them, just AT&T and Verizon, those are the companies, not T-Mobile, because they don't have this stuff. And so I think they're right. The government did drag its feet in doing this, but that kind of brinksmanship in terms of PR for consumers is like, what? AT&T and Verizon wants me to crash in a plane. I don't know that that's such great PR, but I mean, it had practical implications too. The supply chain, oh my gosh, and the cargo planes and it's just kind of endless. So I think there are points on both sides of that, and sorting it out.
And I want to be clear, John. I'm not arguing that within the parameters that you set out that there's not an issue. What bothers me is the reason why we have government, in theory, is to be way ahead of the curve, in terms of, okay, we know this is a problem. We're going to partner with the airlines. We're going to partner with the carriers. We understand the value of 5G at a macro level in terms of what it's going to do for the for connectivity with both consumers and businesses. And I just don't understand why it had to get to this kind of brinksmanship type of stage. I think it was more the FCC, but that was slow to do something about this. That's my read of what the reporting that I could do. Rob did, obviously it did as a lot on it too. That's, if you wanted to blame somebody, maybe that's who you blame. But I think now that they've pushed it to this point, that they will resolve it. I mean, if I had been the FCC, I would have just said, look at what they did in other countries, and they have buffer zones and things like that, and that's what we need to do, and just do it. As that's, it's difficult to point a finger, though it is. Let's get Stewart in here, because I know he's chomping at the bit to say something something profound. Go ahead, Stewart.
First of all, I think nobody's communication has been good in this, especially the mainstream media. The problem is not 5G. And I wish people would stop framing this as a 5G issue. The issue is the C-band frequencies. It doesn't matter what you're running in the C-band. The problem is, as John mentioned, is these older altimeters run their communications the way that they measure the distance between the plane and the ground in using frequencies in the C-band.
Which they've been doing, by the way, they've been doing it for decades, by the way.
That is correct. That is correct. But the frequencies with that AT&T and Verizon are using are close to, and there is a buffer between the frequencies used by these altimeters and the 5G service, this faster 5G service that Verizon and AT&T want to do. And the problem is only within a couple of miles of the airport. But the way the media has played this is that 5G is going to crash planes, which is insanity. This is another, just like politicians don't know anything about technology. I'm shocked that the mainstream media isn't really being responsible in reporting this. It is a sliver of the C-band owned by only 2 carriers. In the U.S., there have been no problems in Europe. The European aviation agencies have, after the fact, said, we should have done more testing. The FCC did testing. And they found that there was no interference in the same way. This is almost the same argument that we were having 50 years ago when the burgeoning wireless phone industry was trying to get what was called land mobile in those years, was trying to carve out some frequencies that the TV bands had claimed. And the TV broadcasters all said, oh, if you give the land mobile people this frequency, it will interfere with TV signal. Then when cellular phones became popular, the FAA was screaming, oh, you can't use your cell phone on a plane because it will disrupt navigation, which was complete and utter horse shit. And so we're back in the same boat again. The FAA has no credibility on this issue because they've only done minimal testing on this. It only affects older altimeters that they've been replacing over the last 10 years already, and just haven't done so as speedily as well. So, I mean, the communication from the media as painting this as 5G is a problem with airplanes, and the FAA claiming things that they haven't yet backed up with testing is just left me completely flabbergasted at the reporting of it and the conflict between them. I'm not saying the FAA is wrong, but the FCC has done tests and the C-band has been used in Europe without any problems. So I fail to understand that why the FAA has not made its case a little more scientifically on this. They're right now doing tests. Why would you make the claim that this is harmful before you make the tests? And after the FCC has already run tests and the frequencies were already sold for tens of millions of dollars to these carriers.
But you know, let's do it. The issue on this. Let's do it, and we got to close this out in a couple of minutes. But and I'll let John reply to my question here. Isn't the point that Stewart is making about the fact that the media, and they do this over and over again, and is that they just don't get nuance, especially when it comes to technical issues. Because they're writing for mainstream publications, people without engineering degrees, the mainstream publications, and it's just easy from a headline standpoint to say 5G is a problem versus spending maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs in the article explaining, well, it's not 5G. Let's be clear about this. No. It's about this decades-long issue that. You could argue the FAA has done a poor job of not upgrading people to get out of that, to address that C-band issue that you recommended. So don't you think the media, isn't it your fault, John? You're the media. I blame you.
I was just going to say, full disclosure, right? I am part of that mass media general audience reporter, and
you're a fine reporter, John. You're a fine reporter.
In television, when you do a television story, man, I have like 90 seconds, to convey it. So it's not a lot of time. I agree that this 5G, people don't even understand that there are multiple bandwidths down in the 700 megahertz. And trying to explain digital television moving around and why did my state? I mean, that was all 5G too. So. And why it works some places and not other places, it's much, much more difficult to explain. I admit that, absolutely. And often, this stuff is all lumped together. But it works in Europe because they put in rules and buffers around airports. So, that's just, and they did test it, and the Canadians tested it too. So I think we should not always just rely on ourselves. Look, there are other good scientists and stuff in other countries too, and maybe we should, look at some of that. It will get sorted out. But yeah, I do think that sometimes we gloss over these issues. It's the same thing if I'm talking about ransomware on TV or something. I don't have a lot of time to explain what it is and how it works. I admit it totally.
It's the cable news format as well. These bite chunks of bite-sized chunks of news for 2 minutes. You can't explain an issue in detail. That's the reason. Okay. Right. Let's hit our next topic here, and that is, if I can walk to the system here, guys. I don't know if you've experienced with this, but Apple has been having some iCloud syncing issues. It just happened a couple of days ago. They just upgraded Mac OS, iPad OS, and iOS as of yesterday that addresses some of these issues, but they've had a lot of, it's not uncommon. They do run into quite a bit of cloud-related synchronization issues. And I guess the question I have for you is that, do you have confidence in using Apple iCloud? I'm putting you a bit on the spot. If you were running a business, I mean, do you think that Apple is making the necessary investments in the same way maybe Dropboxes or Boxes or some of the other, cloud services, that's their business versus iCloud, which is kind of like just a major support infrastructure that Apple uses? So kind of a wild question, but it's just something that has been in the news. And let me have Stewart address that right off the bat.
Well, I mean, anytime you deal with these kind of really, really technical issues, I don't know a single cloud-based service that hasn't had some issues of some sort at some point during their, whether it's AWS or Google or Microsoft Cloud. I mean, they're whether or not they've been hacks or breaches or sync issues. I just got a notice from Dropbox. You'd mentioned Dropbox that
yes, I know what you're going to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, they're warning people not to upgrade to Mac OS 12.3 because they haven't figured out, Dropbox hasn't figured out the sync issues that might come with that particular upgrade. So you have all of these divergent providers, cloud providers. You have all of these independent third-party, what I would call accessories, like Dropbox, and people who rely on these bigger cloud services. There's always going to be conflicts. There's always going to be, breaches. There's always going to be technical glitches. And so I think for businesses, the larger issue isn't necessarily, do I trust them? Because quite frankly, Apple has been very good. Usually this went unreported for some reason for a longer period, but that's unusual. Usually Apple is very upfront about problems that they have and that they're in the middle of solving them. This was a bit of a glitch on that end of it, that they didn't immediately report it, that they sort of kept it under their hats for a while, which mystified me for whatever reason. But usually they're pretty Johnny on the spot. They even have a whole division devoted to trying to hack their own systems so they can find the problems before the hackers can. So, their own black hat, I think it's called, their own black hat crew. In fact,
you probably saw the story the other day. They just paid an enormous bounty to a young hacker, if I'm not a young hacker, but a young person who identified the. And by the way, most of the tech companies, in fact, I think all of them, HP, Dell, they all have hack bounty.
Absolutely. So, I mean, they're all going to have issues at some point. I think as a business owner, you just have to expect that at some point, and it's always, Murphy's Law, it's always going to happen at the least convenient time. But I don't think that this is a trust issue that's going to impact their business as much as it's, say, whatever price they're charging that might be higher than somebody else's.
John, your thoughts?
Well, I agree. Yeah, all the cloud services have had outages. Even AWS, has had some pretty significant outages, and it just shows how much we rely on this. I've, even there was something yesterday where I noticed the service was down for about 2 minutes, and I'm sure they got tons of complaints and probably thought, uptime of 99.99% is pretty darn good, except unless you're trying to access it in those 2 minutes, in which case it's not so good. So yeah, traditionally, as far as businesses are concerned, Apple has not been a serious contender, right? It's that the history of it is the art department people are the ones who have all that stuff, but if you want to be serious about this, you do these heavy duty backends and data centers and blah, blah, blah. Apple certainly made much better than that historical sort of prejudice against them. However, they have not been, up to par with the Googles of the world when you look at the data center and backend support. So the reason that CarPlay is slower than Android Auto is because they don't have the data centers that Google does. So as a business, you kind of look at that and think, well, I don't want to do either one of them, but if I have to choose between them, then I'm going to probably go with Google. And I see more businesses doing it. It's funny, just this week, because I does work at the Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York City, and they are moving one of their platforms for something they did on their own to something that they're going to put as part of YouTube. And, they have a limited budget. Obviously, they're not a for-profit kind of institution, but that's a risk. And I could tell the people there were like, I don't really want to, I'd like to rely on my own company to do this, but you know what? It's basically free at YouTube. And it's hard to make that argument that I should keep it on my own platform. So, it's just the reliance that we have on it now. So the Met is moving too.
Yep. Well, guys, this has been a great conversation. We're probably right against that old clock here, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join me for today's podcast, guys. For our viewing and listening audience, please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Mark Vina Tech Guy. And until next time, have a great week, and guys, thanks again.
Thank you.